that ratings for the women's tournament were going to epically crash this year.
A deep one. You bet! Caitlin Clark!
Here comes Clark.
Bueckers backdoor. Pumps it in! Plus the foul!
You ever see a moment so electrifying that it shifts the entire sports landscape? That was Caitlin Clark's run in the 2024 women's college basketball season, when she seemed to single-handedly attract an audience of nearly 19 million people for the national title game. It felt like the start of a golden era. Ratings soared to unimagined heights. People who had never tuned in before suddenly talked about women's college hoops, and for a moment, the entire country was captivated by a single athlete's brilliance.
Clark on the drive, banks it in.
Now fast forward just one season. The 2025 championship still featured powerful teams, star players, and a legendary coach in Geno Auriemma. Paige Bueckers had returned from a devastating ACL injury, seeking redemption and ultimate victory. You would think the ratings would remain on that historic trajectory. Instead, the numbers crashed from a record 18.9 million in 2024 to around 8.5 million in 2025. That's a drop of over 10 million sets of eyes. And just like that, we discovered a hard truth. Caitlin Clark wasn't just a star, she was the gravitational force that pulled millions of people into the orbit of women's basketball. When UConn faced South Carolina in 2025,
Bueckers gives it up strong. You bet!
we still had storylines that under normal circumstances would enthrall basketball fans. There was the unstoppable legacy of Geno Auriemma, the return of Paige Bueckers from injury, a shot at the Huskies reaffirming their status as the ultimate dynasty, and even the defending champion Gamecocks aiming to protect their crown. On paper, it should have been a massive draw, but the audience that had turned out in droves the previous year seemed content to sit this one out. Plenty of fans online claim Paige Bueckers moves the needle just as much as Caitlin Clark. Social media was aflame with posts that Paige has a ring while Caitlin doesn't, or that Bueckers is the true generational talent. Yet when it came time for tip-off, only half as many people showed up to watch. That's the stark difference between what we assume about star power and what the numbers prove.
Caitlin Clark!
Here comes Clark. How will she go for history?
It didn't help that instead of simply celebrating Paige's triumph,
this place is a second home to me.
a corner of the internet seemed obsessed with turning her accomplishment into a referendum on Clark's legacy. Everywhere you turned, the tweets and comments brought Caitlin's name into the conversation. Who has more hardware? Who deserves more hype? Who's really carrying women's college basketball into a new era? Fans forget that Paige Bueckers and Caitlin Clark have publicly expressed nothing but respect for each other. Both of them appreciate what the other does on the court, yet the online world often finds ways to pit them against each other, even on a night that should have been purely about UConn winning another national title.
It's an even dozen for Geno Auriemma and Connecticut. The final page in the book of Bueckers.
Let's talk about how the needle-moving narrative began. The best way to measure a star's impact is to look at audience interest, whether that's TV viewership, social media engagement, or overall buzz. By that measure, Clark skyrocketed into an entirely different stratosphere. In 2024, the Iowa-UConn semifinal game alone drew 14.2 million viewers, and then the championship, featuring Clark against the Dawn Staley-led South Carolina squad, soared even higher to a record-setting 18.9 million. It wasn't a fluke either. Even Clark's earlier tournament matchups consistently broke viewership records. People who never bothered with women's basketball tuned in specifically to watch her. She wasn't just an extraordinary player, she became must-see TV. Her long-range shooting, her magnetic personality, the brashness on the court, and her ability to drop 40 points while dishing out highlight reel assists transformed every one of her games into a national event. Now consider Paige Bueckers. She was once considered the face of the sport before an ACL injury took her out. UConn faithful had championed her as the next great star, the one who could continue the program's dominance and bring massive audiences with her. Her skill set is off the charts. She's smooth, she has a lethal mid-range, she can distribute at a high level, and she's widely praised for her poise under pressure. When she returned to health for the 2025 tournament, anticipation was sky high. Everyone expected that the combination of Paige's star power and the unstoppable brand that is UConn would sustain the momentum from the previous year. And don't forget the presence of players like Aaliyah Edwards, Azzi Fudd, and the incoming recruits who'd also built up hype. Even so, the final game's 8.5 million viewers signaled that the Caitlin Clark effect was very real. real. Naturally, that drastic reduction in audience sparked a wave of explanations. Some insisted that 8.5 million is still an outstanding number for women's basketball. That's true in the grand scheme of the sport's history. Any year that sees millions of people watch a women's game is a positive. It's the third highest rating for a women's national championship game, so by any standard prior to 2024, it's still a big deal. Yet the fact that an additional 10 million people tuned in the year before when Clark was playing is undeniable evidence. She's not just a talent, she's a phenomenon that drags the entire sport into mainstream conversation. Some people tried to chalk up the difference to matchups. They said that Iowa facing South Carolina in 2024 was particularly compelling because of the undefeated streak, or they claimed that the novelty factor was higher. Others brought in demographic factors, pointing out that networks included a higher percentage of TV households in measuring that year's rating. But even if you look at percentage shares instead of raw numbers, the gap remains huge. The energy and spotlight followed Clark wherever she went. The same social media accounts that bashed Clark's star status were ironically giving her more attention by constantly comparing Bueckers' new ring to Clark's title game loss. In a sense, it became a conversation that inadvertently promoted Clark more than it celebrated Paige. All of this overshadowed a significant truth. Paige Bueckers had a fantastic tournament run, culminating in her leading the Huskies to a dominant performance over South Carolina. She had multiple 30-point outings, a 40-point showcase, and she ended up solidifying her position as one of the premier talents in the game. She's the real deal, and her name belongs in every conversation about the bright future of women's basketball. Yet the immediate pivot to "she has a ring" Clark doesn't glossed over the context. UConn's roster is loaded with five-star recruits. Paige isn't the lone superstar. Meanwhile, Caitlin carried Iowa on her back with limited help, playing a role that demanded she take over games in heroic fashion. It's apples to oranges if we're simply handing out bragging rights based on championships won. Some retired players and analysts tried to bring nuance to this debate. They pointed out that you can't measure a player's greatness solely by championships. The men's game is full of legends who never won an NCAA title, and no one doubts their legacy. Lisa Leslie, a Hall of Famer who herself never hoisted the NCAA trophy, once said that an individual can be the greatest without necessarily winning it all in college. It doesn't diminish what Paige accomplished in 2025, nor does it dim Clark's extraordinary 2024, but a portion of fans turned it into a hyper-focused argument, ignoring that both players are generational in their own right. Instead, the conversation became about diminishing one in order to elevate the other, even though neither athlete has shown any interest in tearing the other down. There's another layer to this. Why did so many casual viewers follow Clark specifically? One theory is her flair. She shoots from way behind the arc, dishes out mesmerizing passes, and doesn't shy away from trash talk. She's reminiscent of Steph Curry's brand of showmanship packaged in the context of a women's college game. Another theory is that Clark resonated with fans who love underdog stories. She came into Iowa as the biggest recruit they'd had in ages, and she effectively put a program on the national map that isn't traditionally a top-tier powerhouse. People love that kind of narrative. Meanwhile, UConn has long been established as the super team of women's hoops, churning out championships under Geno Auriemma, so maybe part of the drop was simply that neutral fans felt they'd seen UConn win before, and it was less novel. Regardless, it still doesn't negate the fact that an enormous swath of fans tuned out once Clark's season ended in 2024. Social media ended up telling a completely different story than the TV ratings. If you scrolled through Twitter right after UConn's win, you saw post after post proclaiming Paige the true superstar of women's basketball, claiming that she would have been the one to break the ratings record if she'd stayed healthy the year before. But the moment you switch from Twitter to actual data, you see a sharp decline of millions of viewers. That disconnect is why purely following social media narratives can be misleading. People talk big online, but it doesn't always translate to the same level of mainstream attention. The interesting twist here is that both Paige and Caitlin stand on the verge of shaping the WNBA's future. Clark has begun to make her mark there, and Bueckers will soon join her. Adding in other rising sensations like Juju Watkins and Hannah Hidalgo, you get a sense that women's basketball is entering a golden era, loaded with young, marketable stars who each bring something unique. Clark's authenticity and flair, Bueckers' all-around finesse, Juju's explosiveness, and a line of other talents waiting in the wings all point to a bright future for the league. The trick is recognizing that they can all share the limelight. When we start forcing these stars into a cage match for attention, we risk alienating fans and diminishing each player's individual story. From a purely numbers-driven standpoint, Caitlin Clark has set a new bar for what one player can do to boost the entire sport's popularity. But that doesn't mean Paige Bueckers isn't a superstar in her own right. Her comeback from an ACL tear to lead UConn back to championship form is monumental. Her skill set is arguably as complete as anyone who's come through the college ranks in recent memory. She's proven she can be the best player on a championship team, and there's no doubt she'll keep improving. The key is that we don't have to tear down one player to appreciate the other. If anything, we should be celebrating a time in women's hoops where multiple stars can shine simultaneously. If we zoom out, the real story is about the transformation of women's college basketball from an afterthought into primetime entertainment. Even at 8.5 million viewers, the 2025 championship still drew a higher number than many men's regular season college basketball games. The difference is that 2024 proved the sport could explode into a massive cultural moment when the right storyline and the right star converge. And right now, that star is Caitlin Clark, who brought a level of curiosity and excitement that left people wanting more. Once she wasn't there, a lot of casual fans walked away. This isn't even about belittling what the 2025 championship accomplished. It's more about understanding that what happened in 2024 was a once-in-a-generation convergence of factors. An undefeated powerhouse in South Carolina, the unstoppable force that was Clark, the chance for her to topple the giant on the biggest stage. That storyline practically wrote itself. In 2025, although Paige returned, the narrative simply didn't capture the casual fan's imagination to the same degree. There was a sense of inevitability about UConn, and a feeling that even if South Carolina defended its title, it would be one we'd seen before. So fans who were on the fence decided not to tune in. But if you're a true supporter of the game, you see that we're in the midst of an evolution. Two players can exist as major stars without diminishing each other's impact. So while social media wants to drag every accomplishment back to Caitlin versus Paige, the real winners are the fans who can watch both. We're heading toward a WNBA that might feature them on rival teams, potentially battling for championships for years to come. Those matchups could elevate the pro league to new heights. Right now, it's easy to get caught up in who got the ring first, or whose ratings were higher, or who has more highlight reels. But in the long run, you need multiple superstars who can captivate the public's attention. Clark may have introduced millions of new viewers to women's basketball. Bueckers may be the one to keep them engaged, and down the line, others will join them to sustain and grow that audience. Imagine the storylines that could emerge. You get a rematch in the pros. Maybe Bueckers' new team is loaded with talent while Clark's team needs her to put on nightly heroics. The entire sports world could be enthralled by the back and forth saga that unfolds over multiple seasons. That's exactly what women's basketball needs. Long-term narratives that go beyond a single tournament game. It isn't about crowning one as the victor in a rhetorical spat on the internet. It's about building an ecosystem where fans tune in all year, every year, for their favorite players and teams. For now though, the data tells the story. Caitlin Clark's presence turned the 2024 finals into a spectacle on par with major events in sports. Without her, the numbers dipped so drastically that the difference was impossible to ignore. Paige Bueckers is an incredible athlete, but the hype didn't translate to the same level of mass viewership. This doesn't have to be a negative critique of Paige. It's simply an indicator that Clark, for whatever combination of reasons, has a unique draw right now. Ultimately, those 8.5 million viewers are still good news for women's basketball as a whole. They show that interest hasn't reverted to old, much lower baselines, and that the conversation around the sport remains lively. The foundation is there for a new generation of fans who got their first taste in 2024 and might come back for more as these players continue to evolve. As for the question of which star moves the needle more, the ratings are clear. But let's recognize that the real story is about how both Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers are helping to shift the sport's popularity. Rather than pitting them against each other, it makes sense to celebrate what each brings to the game. We can appreciate UConn's dominance and still acknowledge that ratings soared to another stratosphere when Clark was on the court. We can cheer for Paige's resilience and champion her success, while also recognizing that Caitlin's style captivates a broader audience right now. The bottom line is that women's basketball is on the upswing thanks to the presence of both, and hopefully the future is bright enough for even more stars to rise.